Today on In Her Words, we're sitting down with writer-director Lulu Wang. She gives us some insight into her projects from The Farewell to the current expats she has on Amazon with Nicole Kidman. Lulu is really vulnerable in including personal stories in all of her projects. We hope you really enjoy getting to know her. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We so appreciate you, and it's so nice to meet you. I was just telling Renee and Emma how The Farewell is one of my all-time favorite movies, and how I love your work. So it's just kind of fangirling here to get to meet you. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So one of the things that we really like to do on our podcast for our audience, we have a lot of students and a lot of people just really entering um, into the entertainment world and entering into the creative world. So we love our guests to tell their story of, what was your path to getting here? Did you always want to be creative? Were was your family supportive? Just kind of how you got to where you are in your career and your journey.
Well, I think I've always wanted to be creative. My mother was a writer, and my father worked as a diplomat in the Soviet Union for many years and then became a translator. And so I think that it was in my family to do something involving storytelling and language and words. And then also being an immigrant. I was 6 years old when my parents brought me from Beijing to Miami, Florida. And so I think that, while I wanted to be creative, it was really challenging to figure out what that looked like for somebody like me while I was also trying to adapt to the culture, figure out where I fit in. And so, yeah, I just didn't do anything really focused for a really long time. Like I played piano and then I took art classes and I also was journaling and then I went to an arts high school for music, but then in college I didn't really want to do music, so I started taking more creative writing classes. And it wasn't until my senior year of college that I took a film 101 class, and that's when it kind of clicked. And I thought, wow, this is really fun. I get to work with my friends, and it leverages all of these different skill sets, writing, my music background, and it was a more social art form. So that's really, I think, what drew me to it, because practicing piano or writing can be a very isolating career path. Um, yeah.
That's really no, that's really interesting. Did you so what if you took those classes, were you able so you went on, did you study film in college?
I didn't study other than just the Film 101
One
class,
class.
which I didn't take until my senior year of college. And by then I was, very close to graduating. I took another film class, but it wasn't like I went to film school, um, and I wasn't even a film major. I just took those as elective classes. So I really had to kind of figure it out on my own after I graduated. I tried to get my professors to help me get commissioned on documentary films, like anything where I could learn. And I think that I was just kind of, well, we didn't have the money for me to go to film school. And also, I didn't feel like I learned well in a very like controlled environment with all of the pressure, like financial pressure as well. And my parents being immigrants, it was always like do what's financially stable. Like, yeah, sure, you have to like your job, but also it has to be stable. And the stability part came first. And I think that there was a feeling that I had that if I didn't pay to go to school, that nobody could tell me how to do it, and I would have more freedom.
That's interesting. Were you when so did you were you in Florida this whole time? Were you still in Miami? When did you move, or, like get to New York or LA, or did you really start out in Miami?
I wanted to leave Miami as soon as I could. So for college, I went to Boston. And then after college is when I moved to Los Angeles. And all my friends were in New York, but I think that I figured, if I was really going to commit to doing this, I didn't have a plan B. It was very tunnel vision. I was just going to move to LA and I was going to figure it out. And I had no idea how. I didn't know a single person in LA. My dad, dropped me off in Los Angeles and was freaking out, and thought, like this is a very, very, very big city and it's a very big industry. And I was like, well, just one step at a time. And so I started off by getting like a temp job and an internship, and little by little, just learning what this industry is.
So Lulu, you were talking just about being personal. What is that like to be that vulnerable? It's like even with the farewell and so forth. Did you have like when you were approaching and or as you approach projects, being vulnerable on that level is not always the easiest. How did you whether you overcome it? Did it come naturally to you? Like what is that? What from an emotional standpoint, what does that look like for you?
It is really challenging, particularly, I was saying earlier that I'm from two different worlds. And so when you're kind of in one world, everyone, you don't really belong there. And then even with my own family, I don't fully belong there. They'll say, well, you don't really get it. You don't really understand. And so my whole life has been like, well, I don't fully understand or I don't fully belong in any arena. And so I think that vulnerability is actually a strength. It's ultimately saying, I am okay where I am, who I am, and I am okay from where I'm standing in this moment right now. And even if I make a mistake, even if I don't fully understand, like that's also okay. Because otherwise, I think we can get too self conscious and we silence our own voices. And so I think that being able to just kind of claim space, and when particularly in this industry when there's not a lot of films that are cultural and culturally specific and are and that there's more and more of it now. But when I was making The Farewell, everyone's like, well, you can't do all of this Mandarin because it's not going to work for broadcast and it's going to limit our audience and people aren't going to want to read subtitles. And then my family's like, oh, everybody's going to speak English, well, that's not authentic. And you're always caught between a rock and a hard place. It's that you're not never enough, right, for any one side. And so, and yet we're trying to pioneer these new roads where we're going, it doesn't have to be one or the other. And you can have a mix of subtitles and you can have a blend of cultures. And so I think that's what I'm learning is that standing in your vulnerability is actually a kind of power and strength.
Oh, that's
Do
amazing.
you feel like the last few years there's been more of that happening? I'm thinking of films like yours and Past Lives and Everything Everywhere and the Spanish language films and Godzilla minus one, and when we had Coda, for the here the deaf community. Do you feel like that kind of that straddling different worlds that you're describing is getting more people are being vulnerable and putting their projects out there?
I think so. I think that it's an organic way to develop because there's only so many stories in the world. But by taking a new perspective on a age-old story that we've seen on a classic kind of structure, but seeing it through a new perspective, through a new lens, gives it a whole new, fresh perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think from, you know, audiences want new stories. They want to be excited. They want to see new things. Um, and so I think that that's why it's really organic. And also, we are looking at a more and more global economy, more global audience. The world is becoming more global. And so I think that, stories need to catch up and actually be ahead of the culture. We can't be behind the culture where you go,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, that's so outdated. That's not what people talk like, or that's not how they look in those places. Um, And so I think that it's really great that audiences are much more open to reading subtitles and sort of seeing the universality of these stories.
Yeah, and I feel like, kind of what you're saying, where whether it was the executives or the finance that, are more worried and they're concerned, and nobody's going to read subtitles, and nobody's going to do this. And obviously, Farewell was hugely successful, and thinking about Parasite and thinking about, but I feel like there's you guys as creators are still fighting that uphill battle. And I mean, there were just articles last week. I know Issa Rae spoke out and she was like, no, nobody's willing to take a chance on these things, and the movie going public, or the consumer, the consumers of creative are, I think they're smarter than we give them credit for. They're more willing to, and especially kids. I mean, the just how, like you said, we're more global citizens. We're more globally aware, and to be open to consume that content. And again, if it's a good story, it's going to be successful. It's going to translate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation too, where what you are feeding the culture is what they're expecting, and so if we're everything needs to be like plot, 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 and it needs to be really short, and we have to jump into the story right away, that's what you're educating a generation of people to get used to. And then, of course, if you give them something slower, or it doesn't do those things, they're going to be like, they're going to resist it, because our brains are now wired for things to happen fast. But if we watch movies from 40, 50 years ago, it wasn't like that. You could have character development. People had the patience to sit and just watch and just be present. And so I think about that a lot. Like, um, what is our responsibility as storytellers, as artists, to not just make content and give people what they want, and make, if they want junk food, give them junk food. Like, no, you're developing also a palate, right? When you feed high
Mhm.
sodium, high sugar, then of course, if you give that kid fruit, they're not going to want to eat fruit because it's not sweet. And so not that it's still entertainment. I think that's important, and we are making entertainment and stories that are entertaining, but what is that balance where it's not just high sodium, high sugar stuff? And I think that's probably where the risk averse comes from, is because we've created this culture that wants junk food, and if you suddenly try to do something else, they won't buy it, and then you're going to lose money. And so how do you get out of that cycle?
No, that's really interesting. So tell us about expats, and how not only you came to the story, but I mean, you're this amazing cast, and just all of the buzz that it's getting. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so this is the project I've been working on since The Farewell came out, and I came on board because Nicole Kidman brought me the book called The Expatriates by Janice YK Lee. And I
Have you
really
worked with
came
Nicole
on.
before?
No, I've never worked with Nicole before. She kind of reached out and called me out of the blue. Not out of the blue, I guess. She saw my film, she saw The Farewell, and she really felt like she wanted my creative vision for the series, and was incredibly supportive about giving me creative control to really play and take risks. So that's why I did it. I thought, where are the arenas that is going to give me the most resources while also having the most freedom, so that I can continue to grow as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. And this it's set in the city of Hong Kong, and being able to be in Hong Kong was amazing. So I came on board, and it's really just very different from doing a feature film. It's a tapestry. This project was really for me about the intersection of so many different cultures. I mean, I think on The Farewell I did that a little bit, but it was in a much more simplistic, like, American Western versus Eastern, and it's one woman and her being divided between two cultures. Um, and on this, it just takes it to a whole nother level. Like all of these different people from different walks of life, different economic backgrounds, and different nationalities, and looking at all of their different privileges, and the majority, it's really focused on women. It's focused on three American women and all of the women around them as well. And I think that for me, I wanted to make a series that interrogates privilege, but also empathy, like who deserves our empathy. And I think oftentimes it is quite binary, like here's the good person, here's the bad person. And in this series, everybody makes mistakes and everybody is both a victim to be sympathized with, but also a perpetrator in a different scenario. And that was really interesting to me, just making really complex female characters that were not good or bad, but just very human.
Did you always see, or when you initially started working with Nicole in the project, was it required to be a series, or did you decide versus a feature film? How was that process with the different kind of formats that you have the opportunity to work with now?
It was always a series. Nicole brought it to me because it was set up at Amazon as as an ongoing series, and I felt like it needed to be a limited series, and I wanted to approach it the way that I do a film, in that there's a beginning, middle, and end. And um, yeah, I wanted that sort of close-ended, a close-ended, that there wasn't something final, and it felt like it was complete right by the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I pitched it as 6 episodes and limited, um, and then really seeing it as almost like a novel. Like what drew me to the novel was the way that it was non-linear and so much about the internal lives of these women rather than about plot and like a whodunit kind of crime drama, which I love, by the way. I will watch any crime drama and I do love them. But that's not what this was. This felt much more the novels that I love, where it's you're peeling back an onion, and there's just all these layers that you're peeling back, and you're learning more and more about these characters and their circumstances. And so I try to approach the series in the same way.
How was it working with a streamer versus something that was that new for you to know, like kind of the business side of it, to know that where it was going to end up versus like you're a feature film that you're like, who's going to pick it up and where is it going to end up? Was there a different working kind of culture because you knew where it was going?
Not really. I mean, I think the only thing that it did was it took the pressure off of box office. That was another consideration where, the thing that I was going to do after the farewell, um, I wanted to take some pressure off of myself in some ways. In other ways, I got a lot more pressure working with a movie star and with a huge studio, but at least I didn't have to consider like all the risks of box office and
Hmm.
those things. And I think that I would have been able to take a lot less risk with this kind of a budget, this kind of a scale, if it was for theatrical release, just because how much you spend and then trying to make sure you get that back at the box office. Of course, there's like a calculation there.
When you went onto the set, and as this was coming together, it's like when you approached it, what were the things that were top of your mind? It's like that to have Nicole Kidman call you and give you a script it's like that's a little bit of pressure, or give you a book and say we want to work with you. What was that first day on set like for you?
It was actually a really joyful first day. We were shooting a lot of episode 5, the fifth episode that's features a lot of characters that are not the expats. And so that felt really comfortable to me, being able to actually, here I am making a Nicole Kidman series, but like at Amazon, and like, the first few days of production, nobody understands what anyone is saying. We're shooting scenes in Tagalog and scenes in Cantonese, and it's all
Yeah.
these faces that are not stars from an American perspective. And so that was really exciting for me. And I thought, okay, this is why I'm doing this. It's a platform for so many people, for so many things. But of course, it was also a lot of pressure. I didn't want to let down, you know, Amazon or Nicole, but I also had a responsibility to, you know, people from Hong Kong and people of the
Yeah.
culture, and so I think that that's just innate to me, that I always feel a sense of responsibility to a lot of different parties. And sometimes those interests don't align, and you're trying to satisfy many different things, and you ultimately can't satisfy everybody. And I think that that's also something that I'm recognizing is true representation is when women of color, women, people of color, any artist who is underrepresented, when they just have true freedom to create, because sometimes the burden of responsibility and representation, it could potentially limit the work. And so that's something that I'm trying to also work through. It's like wonderful to have some responsibility and awareness, of course, but then also as a storyteller, as an artist, you need to let go of all of that. Like even making the farewell, I had to let go of what I thought my parents would think and tell the story that I felt was the heart of the story. And if I actually really followed my mom or my dad, then there's no way. You can't satisfy all these people. And in the end, of course, my mom didn't like the farewell and felt she was misrepresented. And so you're always going to have that when you're telling really personal work.
Yeah.
So
With these projects, what does your team look like? Do you have kind of a close knit group that you write with? Do you have your same kind of production teams? What's the team that you want around you? Because like you said, you are vulnerable, and some of these stories are personal. Who do you surround yourself with when you're doing these projects?
Well, Expats is the first time I worked with a writer's room. Previous to that, I wrote alone. And it was really wonderful. It ended up being a room of all women and from all different backgrounds and very different perspectives. And so, that was wonderful because so many of the storylines are, their personal stories. So I'm not the only person who's putting myself on the line and being really vulnerable, like Gursimran Santu, who is a Punjabi American Sikh woman, you know, tells her personal story in this episode through in the series through Hillary. And so it just felt like a real community. And then, of course, in production, I work with the same team that I had on The Farewell. So my producing partner, Danny Melia, she and I have a production company together. And so, in addition to producing the stuff that I direct, we also produce other filmmakers, and particularly newer filmmakers, new voices. We really try to support them and protect them. And Anna Franquesa Solano, who's from Barcelona originally and is Catalan, and she's my cinematographer. Young Ok Lee is Korean American, who went to AFI. And so it's all of these different people from very different cultural backgrounds. And yeah, and it just so happened, I didn't do it intentionally, but it just so happens that I end up working with a lot of women, which is wonderful because we have a shorthand in terms of language and just communication, that um, is, I think, just very organic.
So expats obviously is here and so exciting and a huge project. What's coming next? What else are you working on, or your production company working on? That is there anything that you can tell us about that's coming out for 2024?
I won't talk about any specific projects because I don't want to jinx anything, but We are really excited. Our production company is called Local Time, and we have projects in animation. We have comedy, drama. We have two independent films that we're developing, and I think one of which we're going to shoot this year. Um, yeah, and so it's just we have did I say we have a podcast as well? So we're just kind of working in all of these different spaces to
Mhm.
figure out, you know, what is the best format for every story and to protect it as much as possible in the early stages and not have too many cooks in the kitchen and not have people try to fit it into their mandate for content.
Mhm.
Um, so that's been really exciting, and I'm working on a couple films. I'm writing right now, and so we'll see. But I do have a project that is a sci-fi project that I'm really
Oh,
excited about.
wow.
Very cool.
So yeah, so I think it's just like we're really interested in like projects that ask questions rather than provide answers. I think that's what intrigues me
Mhm.
is often even with the farewell, it came from having a question of like what is the right thing to do, and that drives it. And um, it doesn't necessarily tell you at the end the right thing, but I think it opened up a lot of people's minds because they're like, well, I've never thought about things that way. And I just think that that's what we need more of in our society is an open-mindedness to see things in a different way. And even if you don't agree with that way, but to see that that's okay for other people, it doesn't have to be for you.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, showing us to ask questions instead of, because we do get in kind of ruts where everyone's giving us the answer. And it shouldn't be the answer, it's their answer. Everyone's giving us their answer of what we should do, think,
Totally.
feel. Yeah.
Well, now in the days of social media too, it's all about broadcasting. Like somehow there's like you know, a need for everyone to broadcast. And also immediately, something happens and everyone immediately runs. And I think that we're missing something, we're missing that like pause to really think
Mhm.
about it, to consider, to have conversations, to consider all of the different layers and nuances before we figure out, okay, what is the right way to handle this, and how is my voice best used, and what is the most efficient, use of my voice in this particular situation.
With everything that's out there, are there voices that are your favorites? Are there books or movies or shows? What are you watching right now that's resonating with you?
I'm watching a lot of older films right now, and yeah, I mean, so many things. I'm also working on a book with my mother, and so I'm reading a lot of biographies, and I'm reading the Laura Dern book that she did with her mother, which is so beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, and I really love podcasts as well. So thank you for doing this. But yeah, I find that there's a real intimacy and a real nuance. Like I listen to Ezra Klein regularly. I just think he is such a wonderful thinker. And The Gray Area is another podcast
Mhm.
and that I listen to. And yeah, I just think it's nice to be part of deeper conversations and really nuanced, thoughtful thinking.
I feel like I mean, podcasts as well. There's something that's so much more. I don't know if it's because it's personal or it's so much less rehearsed, and people feel like they can jump in or it makes them think about something versus other mediums that are edited, I guess, that are you're writing and rewriting and editing. But there's just something about podcasts and learning and being able to hear someone's real opinion and real expertise in an area that are we're just so like we're so lucky to be in the podcast era.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have such a love and for podcast because The Farewell was a podcast before it became a film.
Mm-hmm.
And it really actually helped me to figure out what the voice of the movie would ultimately be by telling the story through podcast form. And I think that the intimacy is unparalleled. Like to be able to, not spend a ton of money, but kind of just get to the heart of it and also be limited because you don't have visuals. It's just voice.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can tell a story and convey all of this emotion in just voice, then you can move to the next level. Imagine what you can do when you have more. But I think, yeah, that it was such a special experience, doing This American Life in a room, and it was just me and a microphone, knowing that all these people were going to hear it. And then, of course, within 48 hours, I started getting all these offers to make it into a film, whereas I'd been pitching it for 3 years and, at my offices and
Yeah.
sending emails, and nobody cared.
Well, Lulu, it was so nice meeting you, and we're so excited to meet you in person at the summit and have you. I think our audience, I was going to say our audience is going to get so much from hearing you, which they will, but I think you're going to enjoy meeting our members and the people who come to our summit, and obviously our other guests. But I think you're really going to enjoy meeting. We have so many creative, so many young women starting out. I think you're really going to enjoy it too.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.